The Red Hot Breakfast.
This is our question of the day. If you had a chance to meet the UN Special Rapporteur, Ms. Can, who is visiting the country for 12 days, what would you tell her about the human rights situation in Zambia?
I think the condition here you see that when them on the other side of the law, everything is okay. When it's them who are facing the consequences of breaking the law, then it is abuse of the law.
So analepita analesha track namusanga mlepta pala kwa city market. So mwalishonga olenza track yali kwa tachira chi home sound chipangata chongo. So nalisa omkinya kuti abantu bafume munshira. Then on the other side kwa liba premium traffic officer nokusantukana. She insulted me, no. So nasa na imi madam nisi mulentukanina. She continued insulting me.
Police officers upezati uziendera mu road bali na motoka ya ZP. Azaboro kungereza che chogoro. I'm talking through experience what Matero police did to me in Makishi Road. Pamene zote approach ma traffic light hapa Zesco, peze ma police officers bakazi na munga kumbuyo. Is a full motoka. Nubo double chabati mukazi aboro uza ni uzianza bwino motoka. Honestly speaking.
Wait. You can't say that on radio. You know that.
My sincere apology to the nation.
Zambia's most listened to breakfast show.
Enjoy.
The Red Hot Breakfast. Only on Hot FM.
Welcome to Zambia's hottest radio talk show, The Hot Seat, exclusive to Hot FM 87.7.
Good morning and welcome to Tuesday's edition of your favorite talk show, The Hot Seat, and I'm your host, Hope Chishala. Now, this morning we are featuring Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection, Social Economic Development Program Manager, Edward Musosa. Now, we are also live on Quito FM, which is 93.3, and Canele FM, which is 97.7 in Lundazi. So good morning once again. Our guest this morning on the hot seat is JCTR, that is the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection, Social and Economic Development Programs Manager, Mr. Edward Musosa. Good morning and welcome to the hot seat.
Thank you so much, Hope. Good morning, and good morning to the Hot FM and Syndicate listeners out there. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. How was the month of April for JCTR?
It's relatively busy.
Okay.
I would say, obviously, in terms of the work, there's a lot to look forward to, the submissions on the national budget. But I'm sure also our executive director, Father Mtale, was here. There's quite a lot of work that we are embarking on, trying to adapt in the changing environment that we're in. But we're really in good health, and thank you for having us here.
All right, you're welcome. Well, we have a lot to unpack this morning, but let's start with this. The cost of living, the rising cost of living in Zambia right now. What are the key drivers of the rising cost of living in this country, and how do they impact low-income households?
Yes, so let me kickstart by saying the cost of living in Zambia is high. It is very high relative to what different segments of the population are earning. But of course, economists also tell you that prices will continue to increase. And with government policy, it's really so much about how do we slow the pace or the speed at which these prices increase. So when you look at the cost of living, based both on what we assess as JCTR from the basic needs and nutrition basket, as well as ZAMSTATS from the inflation rate, annual inflation rate measurements, it's a combination of both economic shocks, climate change, as well as some of the policy measures which have not really been as effective in terms of addressing this problem, starting with the inflation in terms of food prices. So you find that the drivers have obviously, if we look back in the year we are coming from, we didn't produce as much food as a result of the drought, and we heard the Minister of Finance saying the production of maize reduced slightly by above half of what we usually produce compared to the previous year. So meaning that there was less food in our economy. And obviously this also triggered us having to import a bit more food than we probably did in previous years.
Which affects the price.
And that also coupled with, with depreciation of our currency. But at the same time, if you compare, when you say the cost of living is high, it's also relative. It's about affordability. So we are saying people's incomes have also remained low or way below what they are spending their money on. So what they are earning is less than probably what they're expecting to spend on. And then lastly, like I've mentioned, some of the drivers or the factors that could have triggered this is also the issue of the energy deficit that we experienced last year, but just generally the cost of energy in the country, whether you're talking about fuel as well as electricity. And if you heard from the central bank, they indicated that the inflation that was the high inflation rate, the increase that was experienced around fourth quarter was partly also triggered by the emergency tariffs, because there's that pass-through effect when you increase, for example, the price of electricity, then this is passed on to consumers. But at the same time, because of energy, obviously, you can see that charcoal prices have gone up, but also households are having to spend on other alternative sources. So it's a mix of those factors or drivers that have persistently kept our costs going up over the last 2 years.
Yeah, and what impacts do these have on low-income households?
So in terms of low-income households, like I earlier mentioned, when households tend to cope differently. So there's in some instances where, those maybe who you can consider well-to-do, they may have to decide, do I buy this high grade of beef or steak? Maybe I buy something low grade. But unfortunately, in what we are calling low-income households, it's to choose. It's a battle between deciding whether we should have 3 meals in a day. So you find that maybe they remove the lunch, people just have breakfast and supper, or they say since everyone is out in the morning, we'll skip both breakfast and lunch. So people are having to ration their meals. And obviously, if you look at our basic needs and nutrition basket, other adjustments include reducing costs on certain expenditures like transport. If you look at the domestic workers, they'll say, instead of me spending every day 30 kwacha or 40 kwacha on transport, I'll be able to walk from Bauleni to Kablonga or Bauleni to Rhodes Park for me to go and work. At the same time, obviously, we have to look at the gender dynamic. So if you have, say, girls in the household or female adolescents, we also have to look at, they get impacted differently, for example, as compared to the male members of the household. So you find that both the males and the females are likely to start engaging in illicit activities just to afford the basic needs. So it's an array way in which it's impacting households, but to narrow it down, it's the coping measures that are being adopted by households that are worrying to us as the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection. Lastly is also the issue of nutrition. So people begin to compromise. They may not have a balanced diet. They will just decide to say, okay, if we can eat Nshima, whether we are getting vegetables in our backyard, then that also becomes the impact.
Now, let's get a bit specific right now. So what specific factors contribute to the rising cost of living? I know you've given us the key drivers there, but if we can just maybe just point at, the main drivers, if we have to talk about this right now.
So these factors, obviously, like I mentioned, include last year, for example, our poor agriculture output. Of course, the outlook for this year is much more positive, given that we had better rains. But if you look at 2023-2024 farming season, our harvest was not good. We barely even harvested anything. So that is a challenge because of the drought that we had. So that was the major contributing factor. Like I mentioned, prices tend to go up due to different factors. For the current discussion or context we're in, the drought was a major factor to it. But at the same time, the energy crisis that we have, like I had mentioned, and the other thing is also, like we mentioned, the increase in the cost of fuel. So if you look at the family of 5, which we usually assess and publicize in Lusaka, you will find that fuel is also a major cost driver or factor for that. But again, like we mentioned, the weak labor and low wages that are in place. So you look at, for example, the 63% of Zambians of those who are employed in Zambia, employed in the private sector. And ideally, when you hear private sector, you would expect that, say, the pay or the working conditions are better than those who are in the public sector. But that is not a true reflection on the picture. So obviously, the absence of decent jobs that enable people to be able to afford as prices rise is also in dire shortage. But at the same time, like we mentioned, the lack of balance or consistency among, say, government policies. So on one hand, you've got the central bank increasing the monetary policy rate or the interest to tackle the issue of inflation, but at the same time, we're introducing emergency electricity tariffs. We're increasing electricity tariffs. Then now this has a pass-on effect, because when you increase, whether it's the burden is still passed on to the consumers, also include those from low-income households. So you find that now it defeats the target of the central bank policies, where they're trying to ensure that they contain inflation between 6 to 8%. So those are some of what I would say, both the demand side as well as the supply side factors that affect the cost of living.
All right. So having said that, how does the BNNB impact different socioeconomic groups, particularly vulnerable populations? Let's take a look at pensioners as well as low-income families.
Yes. So if you look at the Living Conditions Monitoring Survey report of 2022, the average household income for urban areas stood at 5,000 kwacha 546 per month, and for rural, on average, it was around 2,122 kwacha per month, and then the national average stood at 3,443. So it's people who are coming from these households that are within this average. This is just an average, so there could be people who are even earning less or those who are earning more. But if you look at a country where about 60% of the population is living on less than 2 point something dollars per day, it means these are the households that are significantly affected. So when it comes to the basic needs and nutrition basket, we are looking at those food and non-food expenditures that enable households or citizens to survive, for them just to make it through the next day. And that is why sometimes there's the contention that, no, actually the figures you are giving as JCTR are less. It's because we are not including other issues, like how much people especially how much people are spending on other services like health.
So why do you
education.
exclude that?
It's because the way the BNNB was designed was to capture the living condition, was to advocate for the living conditions of poor households within a certain income bracket. So, for example, we wouldn't assume then that those households are able to afford to pay for a taxi, or they're able to afford to pay to go to a private health facility. But at the same time, those households, when we assessed, felt, for example, that they are consuming more of roller meal because of their income status, which is cheaper as compared to breakfast mealie meal. And of course, some of the foods and the brands of the food, of the prices of those foods we monitor. So everything, for example, soap, you may say soap is soap, but we can't, for example, measure the cost of a beauty soap. So we'd go to the least or the most cheaper product to get that price. So obviously people are spending more than that. So our purpose is to advocate for the poor households, and that's why we focus on the basic needs. So certain food items, which for example most people in Lusaka, which is predominantly urban, they may not appear there, but if you go in the peri-urban areas or the markets we go to, you find that those products move. So the effect of that, of course, for us is once we collect those, we measure those prices and the price changes, is that when you're speaking to we do another survey called the Satellite Home Survey, where we go to households to just assess how often are they buying, saying, a bag of charcoal, a bag of millimil, how much are they spending, so that we understand from the consumption side as well. So that even when we calculate on average, we know that households in Lusaka are buying a bag of millimil, all things being constant, this much in a month, and that is how we're able to compute. So we get an understanding of how the cost of basic foods and basic non-food items are affecting households at the community level.
So for the sake of one who may not understand, just kindly explain, where things were last month and where we at the moment.
So the recent report that we produced, because we collect information or data every month to look at how are the prices changing for those items that we monitor. So the recent report that we have, for to round it off, the cost of living for a family of 5 in Lusaka, we monitor in about other towns, but in Lusaka mainly we just use it as a benchmark, knowing that probably in other areas the cost could be a bit more higher or what, but we try to disseminate that. So for Lusaka, we assess that the cost of the basic needs and nutrition basket for the month of March is around 11,000 kwacha, 11,500 kwacha, with some mungwes somewhere there. So the change from February, it shows that it has reduced marginally and maybe insignificantly, just by 52 kwacha. So the cost is still high. Of course, there's been that drop in about 52 kwacha. And what we observed is that this marginal drop was mainly on food items. But don't forget that when we did the report for February, the basket had increased by about 750 kwacha, somewhere there. So if you compare the 2-3 month period, you find that the basket has barely reduced in the first quarter.
Yeah. But whenever you share these figures, the arguments that usually pops up,
Yes.
Edward, I am in the 3,000 kwacha bracket. You're telling us it's, we're standing at about 10,000 kwacha per month. I do not earn that. I manage my 3,000 kwacha. So how do you explain that?
So I can't validate hope with the 3,000.
No, it's just examples that I'm sharing with you,
yes.
because
So, and that's the first question we started with, and that's a big question, and that's probably something that we're going to hear from the phone calls. And it's a conversation that started last week on how are people managing. So the BNNB price monitoring survey that we do is very easy. It's very straightforward. So we would go to shops, we would go to markets and just find out how much is this costing, how much is this costing, how much. We go to different markets, then we do an average. So for a family of 5, of course you've given the argument that those who earn less. So the question is, how are they managing? And you can get different answers. What we found, even when we did the satellite home survey, is that, for example, people are borrowing a lot, both informally and formally, and also as a consequently, people are also defaulting on those debts that they're accumulating. So now you see a lot of these micro lending companies. They've got a lot of assets sitting in their garages, in their yards, because people are defaulting. They are failing to pay. So that's how people will cope. And obviously, other alternatives, they are rationing on how they are affording. So if you look at the average earning for domestic workers for 2023, which stood around 3,500, people are probably even earning less than that. So are those people surviving? They're probably living in unsanitary conditions in terms of their households, and also people are probably also having to do different jobs. So it's not necessarily that they have to earn. So in that basket, for example, you'd find mealie meal, you'd find some vegetables, but it's not that people are buying all that. So if people want to to just reach that basic minimum of a standard of living, they have to spend that much money. So what does that tell you? It tells you that when we say 64.3% of the population are living below the poverty line, it means even that same basic or minimum required expenditure for them to survive, they are unable to meet it. And that's basically how I can put it. There are different ways in which people are getting through all these difficult economic times and challenges. But essentially what it just entails is that people are barely even meeting the minimum. I would give you an example. Social cash transfer households, there was an increase, a temporary increase for this emergence period of around 400 kwacha. And Parliament recommended that you must increase this according to the monthly poverty line of around 500 kwacha. Because then you ask yourselves, how are those people are getting social cash transfer of just 400 kwacha getting by? If you are getting 3,000 kwacha, just on average, if you have to pay rentals in Lusaka, how much is a house? So already, just that 3,000 kwacha, half of it goes to the rentals hope. Now, how much are you going to remain with for your transport, for your meal? A bag of meal is between 250 and 350. Charcoal is costing you a 90 kg about 400 kwacha. That's already about a 1,000 kwacha gone. We can't even touch on the relish.
Yeah. All right, in case you're just joining us, our guest this morning is the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection, Social and Economic Development Program Manager, Mr. Edward Musosa. Now, Edward, you have given us figures for Lusaka, and well, it's good that you've explained that and how you get to those figures. But what of rural Zambia? You know, Lusaka is not Zambia. What's the picture like there?
All right, thank you. So for the BNNB, the way it's done in terms of our geographical scope, it has its own limitations, which maybe we can discuss later. Is that it's not in all the districts. So the districts we measure, like for example, if you talk about districts that you can consider rural, obviously the cost, especially as a result of the type of maybe foods that are consumed, the type of services that they spend on is much lesser. So, for example, in the month of March, the cost of living for, I would pick Chinsali, which was the lowest, stood at, for a family of 5, stood at 5,000 kwacha, 912, 16 ingwe. And you compare it to towns like Ndola, which is at 10,000 kwacha, Lusaka, which is at 11,500 kwacha. Then you also have towns like Pika, which stood at 8,000 kwacha, 147, so 9 ingwe for a family of 5. So there are other.
And what can you point out for that drop from 5 to 10? What are you pointing at there?
Well, for the main, obviously, given the rainfall pattern that we had for this month, you find that during this period also, most of the communities in these districts are also farming communities. They're into agriculture. So they grow a lot of foodstuffs. You know, they grow maize. They're able to grow vegetables, but at the same time they're able to rear livestock because of that period. So they also tend to. So you find that it's not like, for example, here in Lusaka where people don't even have backyard gardens. So the marketeers or the people who are bringing the produce here, because sometimes even just what you would call the value chain, how food moves from the farm up to your table, tends to affect the cost. So because the farmer there is experiencing load shedding in Chongwe, they're spending more on diesel, so they also tend to increase the price of the vegetables. But if you go in these rural communities, everyone is growing vegetables, everyone has maize, so they're barely spending. So you have more food available, probably even more than people would want to buy. So they would buy other things. So those are some of the factors, the availability of food in these communities, especially when you've got good rain. So in the farming communities, the cost tends to be a bit lesser, and obviously demand for other services is less. And you know, sometimes when demand is less, the cost is always less. Just like if I were to say in Lusaka, there are certain areas, if you're getting on a bus, have you ever asked yourself, why is it that the bus fares are cheaper? if you're getting on a bus from town, going to one area, same distance, it's more expensive, but same area, it's cheaper because people also consider perhaps the demand there, the incomes and factors like those.
So are people managing to have, from your research so far, people managing to have 3 meals a day?
We can't straight point to that. We haven't really focused on assessing that in terms of how many meals people are having. But from our satellite home survey, we can just use an indicator, and you find that maybe people are spending less on food because it's prohibitive in terms of the cost. Like I was mentioning, that it's not a choice of saying, as a working, maybe a middle income working household, the cost has gone up. We now have to remove mayonnaise from our food baskets. These are households that are already eating the basic. They're eating the bare minimum of it. So when money is a problem, even at a personal level, there are just certain things you cut out. Maybe if it's the ladies who say, no, I'll not be going I won't be doing my nails, I won't be doing my hair, or things like that. So you find that even at the household level, they'll probably start cutting down on the foods, and there is other researchers that have shown that. Last year when we were in a drought, is probably even one of the reasons why the government said, okay, you know what, let's increase the social cash transfer. Let's also have, there's what they were calling food for work, including cash for work. At the same time, FRA said, let's start selling maize at the community level. And in the schools, they say, let's start giving children these what they call the homegrown school meals, where the children go with plates. Why? It's because they knew that because of that challenge which we had as a drought, and people don't have money to afford food, it's very likely that the homes that the children are coming from, they are not having their breakfast, and this might lead to absenteeism. So yes, whereas JCTR has not done a specific study on that, but where there is food shortage, either because people cannot afford or food is just scarce, people do tend to cut down on the number of meals they have per day.
Yeah, and I'm happy you've touched on government's some of those programs, the intervention programs that were kicked in. So, and in terms of response to these disasters, we can point at the drought. What do you make of government's response to some of these disasters?
To start with, before I even get into that, as the JCTR, we're actually calling on government we had a drought and is it food security emergency response plan, which, if I'm not mistaken, is coming to an end this year. So it would be prudent and also in the interest of accountability that at least the office of the Vice President should give a report on how that plan has performed, because we realigned our budget had a supplementary budget in order for us to divert funds to spend on emergency response. At the same time, we also received external resources from cooperating partners to finance these the emergency responses. And we also caught wind of it that the Office of the Auditor General was doing these real-time audits, because also when you're in emergency, there are certain either procurement or public financial management procedures that you tend to either short-circuit or overdo, because it's an emergency. So you have to respond to save lives. So also that creates room or vulnerability, or increases the risk of financial mismanagement. We have seen this we have seen it in this country before in terms of the COVID-19 funds. So as JCTR, I would want really government just to give us that. So in terms of government responses, policy-wise, the responses were adequate in terms of what government planned to do to respond to the drought emergency situation that we're in.
Yeah,
the only challenge.
Yes.
Like, you want me to run you through some of the
programs? Yeah, sure, go on.
So, but the only challenge we had is in terms of the financing. There was a huge financing gap, and up to now, we don't know really if government met that financing gap. Some of the programs are still ongoing and they're ending this year, like the Cash for Work.
And what do you make of that? I mean, the Cash for Work program.
So the Cash for Work program, we feel it had good intentions. We also acknowledge the fact that government said we'll set this, 2 billion kwacha aside, and we're going to spend it on cash for work and to give the local authorities. So the intention was good. We just feel the implementation was not well thought out in terms of the scope of works that these community members were going to be doing and how they would actually contribute to community development in terms of, for example, sanitation, or is it security? Because there are a lot of services that are offered by the local authorities. So we felt the services that were going to be provided by these households could have been better aligned to the services that are provided by the local authority. We have been to some districts, and I'm telling you, Hope, they would be telling you to say, this is a drainage that was dug by the Cash for Work people, and you're just looking, look, this is not even a drainage. This is just a small drain, and it's inadequate. So we felt the scope of work that they were doing could have been better aligned with our development programs at the community level. Secondly, there have been challenges going into this year in terms of Cash for Work payments. I think we've seen the council chairperson, for example, for Chipangali district being on record. We've seen other beneficiaries also complaining that they haven't been paid. Then we've seen the local authorities coming back and highlighting some teething issues around the payments, the database, verifying people's numbers. So we felt it would be a challenge really to assess the impact of the Cash for Work on the community. With regards to how they've helped households, that would also be another issue. So we felt since we're using public resources, we could have done a better strategy, and moving forward, lessons learned. The major cash transfer, we commend the Ministry of Community Development and Social Services. They've done a tremendously good job in terms of making the payments, ensuring that households are getting these resources. So that one, we haven't really seen significant challenges even in the communities where we've been as JCTR. For us, the only concern is the issue of sustainability. We've heard the minister for that particular sector indicating that this program is coming to an end. Is it this month or next month? So now what happens to those additional almost 900,000 households that were added? Also the top-up that they were getting, it means it will reduce. But we know that the effects of a drought won't go away overnight. The other thing is the homegrown school meals. Also, that was a good initiative. We are happy that we haven't really observed any challenges. Where we felt we missed an opportunity we could have leveraged on as a country is that on the Constituency Development Fund. We didn't really use the fund adequately to respond to the emergency, which at that time had actually become a community need.
All right. And let's also focus on nutrition. Yes. Are we really focusing, paying attention to the nutrition aspect in this country right now? I mean, we can talk about having 3 meals a day, but what type of meals are we having? And we know as a country right now, we're battling with issues to do with malnutrition. We're losing lives to that. So is there any focus on nutrition?
Over the past years as a country, we've been doing well in terms of addressing malnutrition in the country, and government's commitment also has been visible. At the same time as what has been visible is the support from cooperating partners, both in terms of supporting these nutrition programs, but at the same time monitoring these nutrition programs. If you look at how devastating the drought was, it affected about more than half of the population. Over 1 million farming households were affected. So it also points to you that these areas were vulnerable to different forms of malnutrition, food insecurity, because at the end of the day, before we even talk about nutrition, they don't have the food. So what we also observed is that some of the cooperating partners, like the World Food Programme, have continued with these interventions in some communities, including the Norwegian Church Age, and there is an emphasis in terms of the type of foods that they are giving these households. At the same time, we know there are these programs that are being implemented by the government. I think there was even a mention, I don't know if it was a joke by the vice president, how they are supporting lactating mothers or pregnant women.
Okay.
So that is also targeting the nutrition aspect within the framework of the 1,000 most critical days. So the efforts are, but at this point we can't really put a number to it in terms of what the impact of the previous drought have been. But we can only estimate that, given that even though there was government response, but the response could have been a bit more, because there are still some households that were affected, given the limitations, obviously, of funding. So yes, government policy-wise has prioritized nutrition, but also we were in a drought, so we are aware that there are some households whose nutrition status have been affected. In terms of the foods, at least with the better rainfall pattern, we know that even in our BNNB, we notice that certain vegetables and fruits become more prominent in terms of consumption during the rainy season. So around this period, the nutrition is relatively, in most households, a bit more like they're able to afford a balanced diet. But as things also get further into the year, you notice that they start compromising. And that is why we've been on record calling on how do we ensure that we don't have these post-harvest losses.
Well, I know if we have to win there and get it right, we have to focus on some of our policies and have to be somehow deliberate. So yes. What policy recommendations does JCTR propose to address the high cost of living and also just to promote economic resilience among vulnerable populations?
Yes, that's a very good question in terms of moving forward as a country. Like I mentioned at the beginning, the cost of living in Zambia is got multiple dimensions or causes to it. Some of them is as a result of our policies. Some of them is the economic shocks that we've experienced as a country. But these economic shocks, honestly, did not really just come during the drought. We're in a debt situation as a country, in a debt crisis or in debt distress. So you find that we spent almost 60-something billion kwacha last year just to service our debt. And that is less than, for example, the 10 billion kwacha that we spent on social benefits, according to the Ministry of Finance update. So secondly, so obviously we would want to see a situation where the government also prioritizes spending on social sector more than we are doing, because for us, we'll compare how much are we spending on other obligations as well as how much are we spending on social sector. So we'd want to see more social investments. We commend government because they've been progressively increasing allocations, but there are sectors, for example, like water, sanitation and hygiene, WASH, whose budget has been reducing in real terms. So we'd want to see a situation where health, education, social protection and WASH gets a fair amount of allocation. So you find that in the WASH sector, for example, under the drought response plan, a number of projects we had to construct dams to support irrigation and access to water by households or communities that were affected by drought. As of December last year, most of those projects had not even reached completion point, though we're expecting to have completed them. So I want to see that situation where government prioritizes more of social sector spending beyond what we are seeing, because we're being told that, end of year GDP preliminary assessments is that the economy grew by 4%. So that does not mean anything to the average citizen unless they see more social cash transfer, they see more support of
trickle-down effect.
Children. And then secondly, obviously we have to really reposition our agriculture sector, and we're glad that there was this this comprehensive agriculture transformation program that government introduced, and more farmers are now enrolled on the electronic voucher payment system. We have to continue doing this agriculture reform so that the output also increases. At the same time, we have to balance both demand side and supply side policies. We need to address the issue of these monthly fuel price reviews, because fuel is such an important input in the economy, such that if you increase it, even people, if we were to put it lightly, even people drive bicycles will be affected, because transport fares will go up, food prices will go up, you name it. So we need also to see how do we address with this fuel triggered increase in the prices. And a lot of stakeholders, both private sector and civil society organizations, have come on board to advise government on that. And then addressing the issue of incomes, as the Ministry of Finance and National Planning begins to do consultations for the 2026 national budget, we hope they will heed to calls by different stakeholders for them to look at how they can use the pay as you earn tax policy to try and cushion the impact of the cost of living on citizens. They didn't do this in the 2025 budget, but we hope that they can consider on how they can reduce some of the pay across the board. And also, lastly, obviously, is more investments, especially in our SMEs. Broadening the tax base doesn't necessarily mean that you need to tax more people in the informal economy. There are people in the formal economy who are still getting away with taxes if you benchmark against what they're earning. So the government needs to be bold by introducing tax policies that will enable us to even benefit from all these million metric tons of copper that we've targeted by the year 2030.
All right. Now, Edward, we can't have this conversation without touching on the load shedding that is affecting the country right now. A lot of businesses, the SME sector, households, and the overall economy, has been affected. What are the potential long-term consequences of this?
So the consequences could be both positive and negative, depending on how we are bored with our policies. First of all, it presents an opportunity for us to invest in alternative or diverse energy mix across, and we've seen that these solar farms being put up, but we hope that we will not lose the momentum as soon as the water levels go back up at the Kariba Dam. So we need to invest more in the energy sector, but at the same time we have to safeguard the poor households. I know there's a conversation around cost reflective tariffs, but we have to protect the low income households from both the price shocks that come as a result of increasing electricity tariffs, and at the same time the direct expenditure that they have on this. So the consequences, like I've started with talking about the positive, I think we need a very clear roadmap with finances that speak to it. The Republican president has been on record visiting different countries to mobilize these resources. So it's then incumbent upon the different government agencies like the Zambia Development Agency on how do we translate those partner commitments or bilateral conversations into actual boots on the ground or projects also coming into effect. The load shedding itself, in our assessment in terms of the negative consequences, we observed that for example, within the charcoal value chain, whereas most of the producers in districts like Rufunsa and Mumbwa will tell you that for us, our increment on a bag of charcoal is really small, or it's marginal. But by the time the charcoal comes to the urban centers like Lusaka, those transporters are usually the ones who increase on the markup. And some of their reasons also include there's some formal payments that they make to authorities as well as some informal payments. So they obviously, as businessmen, they exploit the fact that because of load shedding, most people now resorting to using charcoal, maybe because they can't afford other clean and green energy sources. So obviously that has affected the expenditure for those households, because if you are buying a bag of charcoal, a 90 kg or 50 kg bag of charcoal, above 300 kwacha. And for example, you have to use two, especially as we get in the cold season, we'll probably be using more charcoal. That is unaffordable. So it means they are probably will be spending more than they would even be spending on the subsidized electricity as a low-income household, because charcoal, for example, is not subsidized. So it does shoot up how much they are spending as a household. But at the same time, because of load shedding, on the income side of the earnings, most of these small-scale businesses closed down, or they reduced their hours of operation because they can't produce enough. And you can see that even not just in the markets, but even in some of these shopping malls. So what is happening when you find that this shop has closed? It means 6 or 7 of the employees, they have had to be sent back home. They are not working, so they are not earning as much. So there were job losses as a result of load shedding. Bakeries, saloons, barber shops, all those could not contain in terms of that, and that affected obviously the low income households who work in these homes. So those are the 2 main or 3 main consequences for us as JCTR, what we found in terms of the effect of the load shedding on low income households.
Okay. So how does the JCTR assess the performance of the UPND government? We're going to the polls next year. Their performance in addressing the cost of living. You've touched on the load shedding and just other pressing economic challenges. How do you assess the performance of the UPND government?
Obviously, some of them we've touched to it, but just to put it more concise, I would say we need first to commend the government that they've really employed a number of instruments or tools to respond to the economic challenges that we are facing as a country. First of all, we need to look at the bigger picture. The country is in debt distress, and we've seen that within the period that from 2021 between now, we've made a lot of progress in terms of restructuring our debt. We are told about 90% of it is restructured in principle, with a few agreements penned here and there. But we've also seen that we've been able to negotiate in terms of the pace at which we service this debt, whereas we're supposed to pay a lot of money, but this has been staggered over a period of time. Some better conditions in terms of the interest rates, so that we cannot really trivialize that particular achievement. It's commendable that progress is made, especially to the team at Ministry of Finance and National Planning. At the same time, we've seen the government trying to go to the demand side and put a bit of money in people's pockets, create some jobs here and there through the cooperative, through the Constituents Development Fund. Of course, that has had its own challenges, which I'll speak to. We've seen also the free education policy, which has been there from the 90s. The government has also added, 5 more grades from 8 or whatever they are called now, from whatever up to grade 12. So also that enables families to save that money they were spending every after 3 months or every after 1 year to pay for school fees. And lastly, also, we've seen some semblance of sanity in terms of public financial management. Some of the leakages being plugged, and I say some because the report from the Office of the Auditor General has also begun to show a worrying trend of the increase in audit queries, both on the CDF, in local government agencies, as well as just generally in central government. So all those are measures for us which we feel, as well as what I spoke to in terms of the drought response in relation to the cost of living, which we can commend government for taking. However, we are also concerned that stakeholders have raised a number of concerns on some of the economic restructuring measures that we've taken, such as the monthly reviews of fuel prices, and how the government has just stood their ground to say they will not back down on this, and this really has sort of created some uncertainty because this is affecting, businesses, this is affecting households because every month you have to adjust also to those prices. At the same time, we feel whereas jobs have been created, the government could do better in ensuring that the minimum wage or the wages across the board are also cost reflective. So as much as we introduce cost reflective tariffs, we must also introduce wages that are reflective of the actual cost of living when we talk about salary increments. So the Ministry of Labour can do better in that regard. The Constituency Development Fund is also worrying, and now the government, almost every year they are going back to the drawing board. They first started with revising the guidelines, then they came back to revising the act. Now we are told they are reviewing the loan component. So it's been a lot of changes within a period of 3 years. Teething, even if it's teething problems at a certain stage, these must be addressed holistically, so that, because this is money. So if every year you're making mistakes with money and you're going back, this is money that we are losing. If people are not paying back, because for 3 years no one realized that the loan component had challenges, but at the same time some of these issues are being flagged by civil society organizations. So we feel the Constituency Development Fund, over time, it might be a challenge for us to point to where really the impact has been. In terms of output, we see a lot of, classroom blocks being constructed, health care facilities. But again, when you read the report from the Office of the Auditor General, the quality of works, the accountability of funds, and also just the generally project management in the CDF is worrying for us as yes. So that could have been done better. And then coming in terms of the responses to the inflation rate, we take special recognition of the monetary policy rates or reviews that are conducted by the central bank. And if we've seen, they've been trying as much as possible to try and moderate how much people access money and spend it by increasing the interest rate. But that measure works, but it's not, the inflation factors in Zambia are not really to do with the fact that people are spending more money, because that works in a situation where there's more money chasing fewer goods. So we feel that must also be complemented by other policy measures, including the recommendations that we've given. And it's like I would give, I think we're discussing football this morning. I know there's probably a team to support Hope in the Champions League, and they are not doing well. So you find fans will be saying, but why are we buying strikers when the issue is in the defense? So it could be that the MPR, could be an issue of the government is introducing strikers, but we need both strikers, we need defenders, we need midfielders, and that's where the issue comes in, that this is able to address some part of it, but then even the central bank recognizes that they still haven't achieved that single-digit inflation target, because there are other measures that we need to address more. We need to introduce adequately.
Now, I need you to speak to this as well. Let's get down to the politics. We're getting closer to the polls, and yes, we usually know how politicians love to play their game. Yes. Load shedding will be a thing of the past. The price of mini meal will go down, and it's not something that we'll be seeing happening for the first time. So how do you respond to this? What's your take on such moves, by politicians as JCTR?
Before we even talk about politicians, Hope, for us, we would call on the listeners, who I believe most of them are probably electorates, to have a different approach when they're engaging with these politicians. I think time has come as a country where we should have what we call issue-based politics that translate into us having leaders that are able to do the work that they talk about that they will do. Because gone are the days where people should come and start painting castles for us in the clouds, and we start clapping and we're jumping, because these things have implications. And I think a lot of conversations are now pointing towards, how do we have strong political accountability? How do we ensure that, starting at the local government level, the people we're electing, are they really up for the task? Can they do the job? people have their own right, their liberty to choose whichever party inclination they have or whichever candidate. But we feel that we are urging electorates that as we get into the campaign season, a lot of citizens must begin to take stock of what their leaders have done, and those who are aspiring to take up that position, are they able to demonstrate that they'll actually do the work and not just identifying problems and coming up with bogus solutions, which when they get that position, they realize that this does not actually work. So citizens out there must hold all those who want to stand for whatever position through the 2026 general elections to bring practical solutions. Politicians must not shy away from signing social contracts with their citizens. They must be able to say, look, just like when you employ someone in a company, I am coming in and these are my key performance areas. When I come in, if I say I will dig a drainage here, give me a contract and I'll sign it. Because as citizens, we're assuming that this candidate knows what they're talking about. If they tell me that I'm going to reduce the price of mealie meal, the price of mealie meal should reduce, because as a citizen or as a voter, I'm taking it that this person actors that are required, or the sort of measures which work for you to reduce the price of mealie meal, for you to bring about a sustainable alternative sources of energy so that we're able to address the situation of load shedding. For you, when you say that, I'll be able to increase wages, it's because you know where the money will come. You understand the context. So politicians must not be adamant about refusing to sign. Citizens must ask their leaders to sign social contracts, to say, me as a leader, this is what I'll deliver. If I don't deliver this, then I have failed. You know what that does, Hope? It puts you at the same page with your leader. Because what is happening now, some leaders will say, no, me as a member of parliament, I've done this. But on the ground, citizens are saying, what does this even mean to us? This is not benefiting us. That is what's happened. So there's a disjoint between what the leaders think as development for their constituencies versus what the citizens are expecting, but also the leaders' ability to respond to emerging issues. So as we go into 2026, we do believe that the cost of living is going to be an election issue, and we must hear practical and feasible solutions from whoever is aspiring for office. Even at the micro level, they must tell us how are they going to use CDF to address the cost of living. Then people will be able to also assess them. How have they performed as incumbents?
All right. Well, it's now 10 hours. Let's get to the phone lines. It's time for you to get in, to call in 0974-870-877. If you have any question or contribution, you can give us a call now.
You're listening to The Hot Seat on Hot FM 87.7. It's time for you to call now and get involved. Call now and get involved.
All right, so give us a call, 0974-870-877. Our guest this morning is the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection, Social and Economic Development Program Manager, Mr. Edward Musosa. So if you have any question or contribution, you can give us a call now. Hello, good morning.
Hello?
Hello, good morning. Bueno, de Bwanje. At Vandani Zinayano. Sepisa from Garden House. All right, go on.
Kuti maridazi watu waposta chani tamete wasanke mata inaona tamete ngatumbuke kwenda pasogoro ine libya ngapezeka sishika bwino muntu wina ngaza kumbali ngoma pusena bauza kuti mwe bwino bazapezeka wajame ni support aroza civility sirizani saniso tamete kuti ande kusogoro singa ganje bwani achifunga kuti tendera pamoja kuti libya katokoneza kapani opposite naona is welcome mzanga usanga sales tigwirizana azana makamba ino makamba vasesa ina mapeze vemtani va civil no ko vachita minister civil gazette mchosepo changana na voice mutiende pasogo but na mindset ya kuti azima zini kujatera pana government ilipo to kapani kujeva no pochana pasa kwa konte kudoka meeting de barfe tu tadem gwirizano I think of good figures. I think of change my president. So sabe. Please let's change our mindset. Kuruka nkaya mbisa ma voters. Sangare dafa ukapani nikuja tena hivi tabanya hivi. Akuba kama tingaende mafundo ngambe kuziko.
All right. Come on. That's a piece of. All right. 0974-870-877 for your contributions this morning on the hot seat. Hello. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Hope.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning, people from JCTR.
Good morning.
Morning, Dr.
Proud
Proud.
from Garden.
All right, Dr. Proud, your contribution.
Some of the issue of hunger, Madam Hope, is the mindset. For example, they give you retirement, you go and do or you go and pray bonanza or a bora bed. When you don't have money, you are going to blame government. Let us have a mindset, the more we get a salary. Not to kumwela to job, ukwatila 10, manyumba usonkela. All those is growing over our budget. I don't know if you are hearing me from you, JCTR. It's not proper. Sometimes we can minimize ourselves. For example, how do you carry 2 beer? Uguina ngubowa. Now when you don't have money, you blame the Republican president. When they give you retirement package, you go and squander with a new wife. When you get broke, be it you are a musician, be it you are a marketeer, when you get empowerment, use it for tomorrow. Don't say no on the number somewhere. When you are conducting, you are getting money. They need to invest. We are going to fight this property with us. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Proud there. All right. 0974-870-877. Let's take in one more and then I'll allow you to respond.
All right.
Hello. Good morning.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks. Your name?
Jairus from Tito.
Jairus. All right. Jairus, your contribution this morning?
Yes, I'd like to contribute on what the gentleman on the panel said about the Devon South and the bread basket.
All right, go on.
Vis-a-vis to what the people earn as monthly wage. It's not rocket science anymore. People earn less and the bread basket is high. That's why we find a lot of corruption, a lot of pilferage in companies. That's how people are surviving. So, for us to fight these vices, we need to take the food basket to the wages. I think that's my contribution.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. Have a good day. All right. You can take those up now.
All right, thank you so much to the callers, Hope. And most of them really are more of comments. So I would say, yes, I do agree with Mr. The caller by the name of Sepiso that, yes, we, like I was emphasizing, we need to have a mechanism which is citizen-led. And I mean, people who vote themselves must take an initiative to say, as we vote this leader, whether it's at the local level, at the constituency level, we are going to have this person working for us for the next 5 years. And they'll be given that constitutional mandate by the people. So therefore, as we are employing this person, what measures are we putting in place to ensure that the job that we have given them, they are able to deliver to our satisfaction, not only a version of what they feel is poverty reduction, what they feel is development. So, and as a Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection, this is where some of our interventions are invested, especially outside Lusaka. We are training community members how they can measure, for example, the quality of service that is in their community and be able to give feedback. How they can assess whether they are involved in decision making. Because again, a leader should not just disappear, come to Lusaka, and then show up in the constituency and say, let's have this number of projects without really engaging with community members. So we congratulate the job that the WDCs are doing. So through those kind of structures, community members can bring themselves together and say, even if we had decided that for me, I belong to this political party, me, I belong to that, let us agree on one thing, that whichever leader we are going to have, these are our expectations, and can they meet them? And how do we measure as we go along the way that they are meeting them? And if they are not meeting them, what mechanisms can we put in place to bring them to book that, look, you are not meeting these? So I do agree with the caller that communities really need to mobilize themselves, that as we go into the elections, as people are campaigning, we have real issues coming out or commitments. And then the call which came out on the from Dr. Proud, again, thank you so much to Dr. Proud. I'm sure he's a frequent listener to your station and to our program. Yes, it is. There is the mindset aspect, but it also proved that there are different factors that cause poverty. And he gave an example of those who are receiving support from government. So as the JCTR are also working with some of our cooperating partners, there is a model we call positive parenting, which we're implementing on the Copper Belt, where we are working with our partner to support social cash transfer households. So we are targeting parents who are benefiting from that by instilling positive attitudes and values in them on how they can treat their children, but at the same time teaching them financial literacy so that when they receive that social cash transfer, they're able to involve the whole family in terms of how they budget and how they spend, but at the same time teaching them how they can access other government services. And that's why you've seen that now the government has introduced the single window initiative, where they are saying if there's only one access point for you to get whichever social protection measure or support you need, and when you access that, you're able to find out other programs, because make no mistake, one empowerment program may not necessarily be adequate. So for example, with the life cycle approach that we're using in the social protection policy, if a child is receiving, say, bursaries at the secondary school level, when they graduate from there, they should be able to get bursaries at the tertiary level. But at the same time, after that, the government must ensure that at least they have access to a job. So I do agree with Dr. Proud, but also acknowledge the fact that not everyone who is poor or receiving support from government, it's because of their bad mindset. In fact, most of them, it's because of structural issues. If you look at our women who make up the majority of household heads who are presiding over poor households, it's a lot of structural barriers. It's a lot of traditional and cultural barriers that prevent women from excelling up to their maximum potential. So therefore, we must address those structural barriers. If you look at other children, it's poverty that they inherit from their parents, and they grow up in that same poverty. So the interventions must be multiple. So even if there's government support, we do agree with that. We must also have a campaign for those who are receiving support. For example, the cooperatives that are not paying back the Constituents Development Fund, they live in our communities. We even know them. So us as citizens must take an initiative. If a cooperative benefits or a businessman gets a loan through CDF, us as community members, what are we doing? Because that money, if it goes back, it will also come back to benefit us. And then lastly, I think that it is true, and that is a recommendation we made in line with what Mr. Jairus had submitted, that we need to ensure that the wages are at least at par with the actual cost of living or the cost of food and services on a monthly basis as for workers. Okay.
Right, let's get back to the phone lines. Hello, good morning. Hello, good morning. You're through to the hot seat. All right, give us a call, 0974-870-877 if you have any question or contribution. Hello, good morning.
Good morning, Madam Hope.
Hello, good morning. Thanks. Your name?
My name is Ernest Mwalusaka from Cassis.
Ernest, all right. What's your contribution this morning?
JCTR. Ijatami ya mango, mganga tuza tulo, chifuga mango, gapaka maningi, so family of 5 feet has reduced. But hapa ndio miri sasa tuna ikwelera kuti mama itenda bwanji.
Okay. Did you get the question there?
Yes,
okay. All right. There's a call. All right. 0974-870-877. You can also post your question or contribution on our Facebook page. That is the Hot FM Zambia Facebook page. And we'll get to read it out. Hello. Good morning.
Hello?
Hello. Good morning. Your name?
Good morning, Opa, and how are you?
I'm fine. Thanks. Good morning.
Good morning, the guest there.
Good morning. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Felix calling from Matel.
All right, Felix, go on.
Yeah. The question that I have for that the guest who is there in the studio, one, how do they cut the prices in order for them to come up with the food basket? Do they just go in supermarkets where prices are high, or do they also go in this common markets, maybe like Soweto market and the second market? And secondly, you talked about nutrition. A lot of people, yes, because things have gone high, the base of commodities are high. So now, since we talked about nutrition and those people who live in rural areas, does the JCTR collaborate with these programs that look about underprivileged people when it comes to food and nutrition, such as the World Food Program? Do they collaborate with them? And lastly, I can just encourage the JCTR to continue quoting the prices, because when they give food basket that they come up, they also help employers come with a good salary scale. They plan out to increase the salary when it comes to pay their employees. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much for that. All right, 0974-870-877. You can take those two up.
All right, so thank you so much. So coming back to the question that has come from Mr. Musosa. So, of course, there are certain foods which are harvested or they are available depending on the season, and those are going to affect the entire basket. Remember, the basket is an aggregate. It's not one product. So you find that if the price of if you are spending, say, 2,000 kwacha a month, and in that month, maybe Millimil reduces by 500 kwacha, we may not come back to your household to come and count. But like I mentioned, we'll do 2 household surveys, satellite household surveys at the beginning of the year, where we just estimate how often people buying this bag. So for us, we'll say, okay, the price has reduced, the 2,000 kwacha has reduced by that amount from the millimil. So it doesn't necessarily mean that then everything else has gone down. It can be one commodity, and it's mathematics like that. So yes, at that time when we had those seasonal fruits, we observed that people, for example, like fruits, would probably say, you know what, I'll have a mango rather than me going to spend on an orange or a banana or any other fruit where I'll spend more money, because I have these fruits in my backyard. So you find that if you go even just outside Lusaka or the districts near Lusaka, the mangoes are relatively cheaper. They were sold almost on our doorsteps every day, so they were cheaper. So people were probably spending more on that. But I would also give an example of certain times when sweet potatoes are available. Hope and Mr. Ernest, is that people, for example, instead of buying bread or buns, they'll buy sweet potatoes, which might be cheaper. And if they have sweet potatoes, in some households, those sweet potatoes will probably keep them full even for the whole day, and they'll probably eat later. So they'll spend less on food. So depending on the seasonal patterns, prices do get affected. Again, like we mentioned, there are a number of factors that affect prices. Just because mangoes affected prices in December, prices went up, doesn't mean mangoes, again, even if the mangoes say go up, people may not necessarily expect a situation where prices will go up. It can be another issue. Maybe charcoal will go up. Maybe because of the external factors, fuel prices are going to increase, or maybe because the kwacha has depreciated, and because you are importing, so we are spending more money, prices are going to increase. So there are a number of factors, Mr. Musosa, that's all I can say. So at that time, yes, it was mangoes. Obviously, mangoes are not as much in supply, or they've completely not in supply now. So we're probably looking at other fruits. So you find that we can't find mangoes when we go in the markets. So that is the short explanation of it. But if you read our statements in full, you'll be able to see which items are actually causing this increase. Like charcoal has constantly been high. Then coming to the last comment which came from Mr. Felix. So we go to both the supermarkets as well as, like in Lusaka, we go to the supermarkets as well as the markets. Some of them even mentioned because of research ethics. We can't name those markets.
Yes, you wanted to know how you get the prices.
Yes, we can't mention, but yes, we do go to the markets he mentioned, and also some of the markets like the ones that he has mentioned, and then when we collect, we do an average. How is it costing? So you may find that in some markets where he's staying, it might be cheaper, or it can even be more expensive, because we put them together and just do an average. So if we are looking at charcoal, we'll probably measure this market, and that market, and put the prices together. So in short, we just don't go to the supermarkets. So these are prices which even in most of these markets they are obtaining, whether it's Kapenta, whether it's Millimil. So the other aspect of nutrition, yes, we do have other projects apart from, because people just think JCTR is just about the basic needs and nutrition basket. We have other climate change programs where we are promoting agroecology in districts like Rufunsa and Mongu, Nalolo, as well as Chongwe, where we are training farmers how they can use much more climate smart or climate sensitive inputs into their farming through agroecology, where, for example, they are able to produce fertilizer just from using organic materials which they are disposing of after they harvest. We teach them also how they can adapt to changes in climate. We also involve other government departments who work on nutrition to teach them how they can prepare sustainable and balanced diet. So we are collaborating, including with one of our major partners, Kasisi Agriculture Training Institute, just there in Kasisi. And lastly, yes, thank you so much. One of the feedback we've gotten, hope as a result of the work we do from the trade unions, is that they do get this data and use it also to negotiate for wages for their employees.
Okay. All right, we'll now take in the last set of calls. So if you have any question or contribution, you can call in now. Hello, good morning.
Good morning, Hope.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, the guest.
Good morning, thank you.
My name is Chama Hope.
Chama, all right.
I'm not Chama Hope, I'm Chama.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
All right, you can go on, thank you.
JCTR, I know you, first of all, let me say you are a very good orator. I don't know if you are a teacher. You speak very well, and you are coordinated in the way you present whatever you are presenting. It's very difficult not to follow you, and it's very difficult to politicize you, because most of the people like politics in this country. But again, the work you do, guests, cannot be detached from politics, because your figure which you give guests is just taken by the politician, and they lump it on the face of the on the electorates and say the cost of living is high. This is 11p, which I don't get, which I don't earn. So this is the sign of failure of a government. So this 11,000 electorate go to the elections, vote against this government. So I think for me, my contribution is that why don't you add perspective to this figure? Because even you, the way the figure is being used, is like this figure must drop at some point. And people attach it to a political cycle to say, if we are in this group should reduce. I stand to be corrected, guests. I don't know if you have ever heard where we are in March 2010 has been lower than March 2020. I don't think so. And you started very well when you said it's more about the pace at which it is growing. And I think for me, let us help the people by also explaining in our statement that this figure might not be, you might change governments today based on the 11,000 which we have calculated, but you'll be surprised that 2028, this figure will be 19,000. And it's possible like that. And I think that's what will happen. This figure won't go down. So I think bring that aspect of saying what we look at necessarily is not. But again, if you look at it, I don't know if I'm being followed. I'm not good like you at being coordinated. Am I being followed? Yes.
Yeah, no, we get your point. We get you.
Yes. So as I conclude, Hope, if you look at where we started, guests, like 2016, because it's difficult to separate you from the politics of the day, your figure from the politics of the day. Where we started in 2021, we were at 8,413 August. This political cycle we are in started at 8,413. We are at 11,546. The difference is 3,000. The previous cycle, 2016, we started at 4,870. So by March 2020, which is the same period from 2016 August to March 2020, we were at 7,178, an increment of 2,308. So these are the things, the perspective in my view, which are missing, and the figure, your figure, which is well intended, but because of our politics, like you have said, which are not issue-based, which are not context, people are being misled, and we'll have people rising in August 2026 with that your figure in mind to go and change government, expecting that this is too much, so that when we start another cycle, it will change, which I believe is not. So I emphasize that on the context. As I conclude again, you said something about the MPR again. What other tools are at the disposal of both? Because we have heard that they are trying to catch money. Because I read about the inflation in America, which took them in the 1980s, it took them 20 years to fight, but they never ran to anywhere. They stuck to monetary policy. So what other tools are at the disposal of policymakers away from MPR to fight inflation, which will catch the pace, which in my view is what should worry us, not the figures, the 11,000, the 20,000. What other tools? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Chama, for that. All right, we'll take that as our last call.
All right.
Your reaction to that?
Yes, thank you so much as well for the comprehensive review of the work we do, Mr. Chama, and we appreciate that he does sound like he's one of the citizens who actually follows the work that we do closely, and I hope also he has access to our website. So our website has got detailed reports which explain, even from the other towns, what are these factors, also which show the trend. So there's a whole bigger report than the statement which we provide, and that is why at JCTR we're now also moving towards how do we disseminate the detailed report as well, apart from the statement which sums up or is an extract from that. So starting with the first issue that he raises about detaching this from politics, obviously as a Catholic institution, we work with the Catholic social teachings, and one of them is work for the common good. So it's really about what is the interest of the majority of the citizens. We do understand the effect that the political economy has on the livelihood of citizens, but as we produce this data, it's not necessarily for us to advance any political agenda or notion. Because we can't trivialize the issue of living conditions to that. It's an issue that affects people. We can talk about numbers, but people are really affected. And I wish also to mention that we do get politicians accessing our data, and they really use the data based on what suits them. We also get technocrats, we get researchers, and they interpret the data depending on how they find it. So we may not get into that space to say which politician is saying the truth, which politician is not saying the truth, but we would be very happy to share on how we give this information. Yes, from the economic side of point of view is that prices will be increasing, but again, we must not forget that every successful government, they've had a target of containing inflation in the single digit. Why? It's because they've measured that if prices are increasing at 6, 7, or 8%, then this is good for the economy. This is also good for citizens because they are able to afford. But then if that doubles or it triples, then it's a concern. So we are not saying that we should be comfortable with the fact that 3 years from now prices are going to increase. Then we should have inflation rate in the double digits. We should contain it within the levels. Sometimes it can also be, like I mentioned, it could be an indication of economic growth. So the issue is, how do we contain it so that people afford? How do we provide adequate incomes for that? And then lastly, also on the perspectives in terms of whether these prices will drop. Obviously, they won't.
Well,
drop.
Everyone wants to hear that.
The thing about prices again is that over time they'll be increasing. For us, what we're interested in is, what are we doing? It's about affordability, because prices can be expensive even across the border. But are people earning more for them to afford the price of millimilk? Because if they are not earning, then we get to a point that a lot of people are poor. Then only a handful of those people are benefiting. I think I should have missed the last question which you asked.
Oh, but I think those were the main focus areas. Yes, those were
the main focus. So it's both demand side. We look at the demand side in terms of what is being done for people to be able to afford. On the supply side also, what are the government policies or measures that are being put in place. And like I mentioned, our repository is available on our website. You can access those reports in detail, and you are able to use them to interpret them differently. And then I think I spoke to some of the measures apart from the monetary policy rate, which I may not go so much in detail. But in short, it's just, how do we support the local SMEs? How do we ensure that the low-income households are getting enough social protection support so that even if prices go up, then we are able to contain this. But at the same time, there are some energy policies that have become drivers of the high cost of living currently. So how do we tackle that? How do we have policies from there also complementing what the central bank is trying to do? Among other measures that government are doing, can they be more result-focused, result-oriented, instead of just saying, oh, we've put up these mini-grids, what is really the impact? We did have the issue of gensets being put across in the market. We need to go back to that and take stock. What has been the impact in terms of access to energy and cost of living?
All right. Well, that's what we need to close now. But as we close, what role can civil society organizations like yours, the JCTR, play in holding the government accountable for its economic performance and also just promoting transparency and good governance? Let's throw in corruption. Yes. What role do you think civil society organizations can play?
So I'll speak to more of what we're currently doing in briefly as we wrap up. So one of them is we center our work on the citizens. So JCTR will not go to a facility or will not go to the local council and say, you received so much money, how much have you spent? We'll train the community members themselves, because they are the ones who are living, who are experiencing the conditions there. They will go to that and ask, how much are you spending on this drainage? How much are you spending on that? So we have people-centered measures that we do. And then directly ourselves, we work with different government ministries where we make submission of our proposals, where we communicate what the citizens are saying about how the government programs are working. So we do a lot of lobbying with members of parliament. So as we are preparing, as the Ministry of Finance is conducting consultations, we'll probably also engage on that. And at the same time, us as civil society organizations are also invested heavily into generating data or evidence that back up the advocacy work that we are doing. So in brief, those are the main things that we are doing to ensure that both government is open and consultative in the way they undertake their decisions, but at the same time, those decisions that they are making, how can they report back to the citizens that as a result of using your resources, this is what we have achieved, and we are able to confirm that even your living conditions have improved.
All right. Well, we have to end here. Thank you so much for coming through this morning.
Thank you so much, Hope, and for the listeners out there. Great day.
All right. You're welcome. Have a good day too. Bye. All right, so that's it for Tuesday's edition of the Hot Sit. And our guest this morning was Mr. Edward Musosa. He is the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection, Social and Economic Development Manager. You will catch my colleague, Peter Zulu, on Thursday for Thursday's edition of the Hot Sit. Have a good day. And up next is The Urban Vibe with Honey.
That was the Hot Sit. Don't forget to join next week at the same time, exclusive to Hot 87.7.